We're taking a deep dive into the NIL landscape that's been, frankly plaguing college sports over the past 4 years. Start the video a bit as a breakdown. If you feel like you're already understanding of what's going on, you can kind of skip towards the end of the video because that's where I get into my opinions. The beginning might be a bit more of a review. But as always, you guys let me know if you think I'm off base with anything. I'm pretty well researched on all this, so I'm not sure that I misspoke on anything of fact. Now, some of my opinions guys might disagree with, but feel free to do that. This is such a tough situation. I also have to say that I am not a legal scholar. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a financial advisor. You did not hear any legal advice from me. You did not hear any financial advice from me. But that all being said, you guys let me know what you think. Very curious to hear other people's opinions on all this situation because it's very interesting to me. We're going to start by setting the landscape of what college sports have looked like over the past 4 years. Major change happened in 2021. Athletes are now allowed to receive compensation for their name, image, and likeness. This is not done through schools. Schools cannot directly pay athletes. And I think this is a major thing that people get kind of tripped up in and they don't really understand. But when you hear about Jeremiah Smith receiving whatever amount of money, that's not money coming from Ohio State. That's not money that Ohio State makes, through their media deals and then giving to their players. This is money that has to be raised through a third-party collective. What is a third-party collective? Third-party collective is an organization set up by donors, really anybody with a vested interest in Ohio State football succeeding going forward. And there's a couple ways that these collectives actually raise money. Major ways through donations from boosters, people that are interested in a specific school's football team. Years past, they would just donate that money to Ohio State's athletic program, and then they would go ahead and upgrade their stadium, upgrade their practice facilities. But ever since 2021, because these athletes can now get paid, it makes a bit more sense as a fan if you want to donate money to your team to give it to the collective that can then go and pay athletes with it. That money was straight up pay to play. When you pay an athlete through donor money, you're pretty much just paying for their services for them to play on the Ohio State football team. They don't have to do any TV ads. They might have something where they have to show up to a jersey signing on part of the collective to help them raise more money through the boosters, but for the most part, it is just straight up pay to play money. We're giving Jeremiah Smith this amount of money because we think that he can have 1,000 yards as a true freshman. That's the kind of money that booster money essentially is. The other type of money that collectives deal with are legit business purposes. So they would have relationships with local businesses, and people on the football team, the players, that they already have relationships with because they probably dealt with their pay-to-play money. So they pretty much act as a medium between businesses and the players on the roster. So if I'm a local businessman, let's just say I'm a landscaper in Columbus, Ohio, and I want Julian Sayin to do a TV spot for me because I think that it would be a good advertisement. I'm not paying this money to the collective out of the kindness of my heart. I'm not doing it so Julian Sayin is better off financially. I'm doing it because I think if I have Julian Sayin in a TV ad, I'm going to be able to generate more money for my landscaping business. The major issue with this setup is that there's no cap on the amount of money the collectives are allowed to raise through donors and then distribute to athletes. So schools, like these collectives straight up, they just take donations from donors and they're able to just wire, they could even Venmo this money into a kid's checking account. So what you see is schools that have more willing donors just have a leg up on the recruiting trail just because they're able to just pay for athletes essentially, just really buy the services of players with no cap. There's no salary cap like you see in the NFL or other sports. There's no type of limitation to the amount of money that these collectives can generate and then the amount of money that ultimately they're allowed to spend on these players. Then about a month and a half ago, a major change happened. The House versus NCAA settlement happened, and essentially what this does is schools are now allowed to pay players to attend their university. They're allowed to buy player services, and they can only spend $20.5 million. Now, this isn't just a football limit. This is across all sports. So football, basketball, women's lacrosse, whatever a school sees that they want to spend their money on, they can only spend $20.5 million pay to play. And this money is rev share. This is money that comes from TV deals, from merchandise sales, from the gate, just whatever a school generates through athletics. They can now spend up to $20.5 million on their rosters across all sports. Another major thing that it does, it no longer lets third-party collectives raise that money through boosters and just pay athletes pay to play. So if you just had the first part of this, the schools being allowed to pay money, what schools would do is they would just keep donating, they would keep raising money through the collectives, and this money pretty much wouldn't change anything. But now the settlement pretty much establishes that these collectives, this money has to be fair market value for a valid business purpose. So pretty much I have to be able to prove that me adding Julian Sand to a TV ad, it makes sense financially for my company and has a valid economic purpose. The workaround to this rule is that you're going to start overpaying these athletes for TV spots and advertisements. So these collectives are going to try to take this donor money and still get it to the athletes the same way that they used to, just under the guise of a valid business purpose. Now, they used to not have to have that guise. They could just straight up pay an athlete whatever money they wanted or whatever money they had to show up to the university and play football. Now this rule pretty much means that they're going to have to try to get a bit sneaky and a bit shisty in the way that they get this money to an athlete. So for an example, like if I'm the Ohio State collective, I'm like, we have all this money that we want to give Julian Sand, we just can't do it through the collective, and we don't want to count against that $20.5 million cap that the actual football team has. How can we get money into Julian Sand's checking account without just being a straight up donation? They're going to have him show up to a 5-minute, a 15-minute event and then pay him $10 million for that. In no world does that make any valid economic sense. So you're going to see a lot of these collectives trying to be sneaky and get around the rules. Now the question becomes, how do we enforce that this money is actually coming through valid business purposes and is a fair market value? That's where the CSC, the College Sports Commission, steps in, and this has been set up by the Power 4 conferences to kind of serve as the oversight and enforcement of these rules. So essentially they're going to, right now the way it works is these athletes are expected to report any NIL deal that they get over $600 through an app called NIL Go, which is like set up by Deloitte, which is a Big 4 accounting firm. That's kind of getting into the weeds of what it is, but essentially the CSC is supposed to make sure that all these deals that happen make economic sense. And then on the other side of it, they're supposed to punish anybody that tries to cheat the system, that tries to get around the valid business purposes that the settlement set up. There's a lot of issues with the state of the CSC right now, and a lot of it's because of how new of a business it is, or how new of an organization, I should say, it is. There's no precedent of them being able to be very strict with these rules. And at the same end, it's like if they are strict with these rules, it's just opening up a rabbit hole of lawsuits that can happen, because there's going to be a lot of issues of them trying to prevent an NIL deal from going through. And then the business, on the other hand, says, well, fuck that. I really want to pay this kid this money, and it makes economic sense to me. The last point we're going to talk about with the House settlement is another massive issue. It fails to address the employment status of college athletes. So what this means that we don't really know if these college athletes are technically employees or not, and the fact that they aren't employees right now, they can't unionize, and they can't come up with this collective bargaining agreement between them and then all the schools across college football, or just college sports in general. So what a CBA does, a collective bargaining agreement, it just pretty much comes up with some frameworks of contracts. It helps kids get paid if they get hurt. It kind of just enforces agreements across, just broad agreements between employees and employers. So the fact that they're not employees makes it kind of difficult. It makes it impossible for them to first unionize and then second come up with the CBA that would really help all of this stuff out. That's why you don't see these issues show up with the NBA, NFL as often as you do with college football. It's because they have CBAs and there's active conversations going on between owners as a whole and then players as a whole. Every now and then you'll get a lockout, but I'd say for the most part it works pretty efficiently. Another issue with this is that these universities do not want to address these athletes as employees of the university. There's a lot of Power 5, Group of 5, and then even some Power 5 teams that just could not afford a 100-man roster of athletes if these kids were technically employees because of all the various labor costs that come up with employment. Then yesterday, Trump passed the executive order that covered college sports, and I think the biggest thing that this one did was it pretty much declared that college athletes are not employees. So it doesn't seem very realistic, at least anytime in the near future, that we're going to see a union and then a CBA. So, maybe that changes. I just don't really know how that can happen. It also reinforces a third-party pay-for-play ban. So the thing with legal precedents when they happen in the court is that they're not codified. It's kind of a weird nuance that comes up in common law, which is just the American law system. So pretty much what this does is it kind of establishes a law, but even executive orders themselves, they're not congressional legislative acts. So I don't really know how much teeth that this executive order has. I guess that it'll depend on some more court cases. It asks federal agencies like the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, and the Secretary of Labor to clarify employment status, blah, 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 in a way that maximizes educational employment benefits. I think what this last part really means is it's trying to spur on some of these other federal agencies, which, usually I'm like pretty anti-federal interference, but this is one of those things that I don't really see how we can go on without any direction from any kind of federal agency. I don't know if it's an FTC question. I don't know exactly who should be the one that oversees it, but until the CSC has actual teeth in terms of enforcement, I do think you kind of have to lean into the feds for this one. Going forward, there's a couple of questions that are going to have to be answered. The NCAA is asking for antitrust exemption. I'm pretty sure from Congress, this is where this authority would come from. This would kind of just let them be a bit more aggressive in the way that they approach enforcement of violations, just because right now I'm not sure there's all that much they could do because there's no CBA. So essentially the NCAA, at least the NFL I know, operates like a legal monopoly. They already have federal authority to operate as a legal monopoly. I think this happened in the 80s. This was a big Al Davis thing a while ago. Anyways, I think that's kind of too into the weeds for what this video is. Enforcement credibility to be established. This is a massive one. The CSC just needs to establish its authority, I think. And like I said, they're going to get sued. I'm telling you right now, there's going to be multiple lawsuits. It's more about the outcome of those. And then if they get a couple wins, then I think they're going to feel good about their enforcement ability going forward. And then rulemaking outside of court cases. Right now, there's no real setup of rules outside of what the last court settlement outlined. It's a very bad way to just operate, I think, having to wait for a court decision. This kind of comes with enforcement, I'd say. As the CSC establishes its enforcement arm, then we can start trusting it to make a bit more rules. That's what I think. I mean, right now this is really just a clusterfuck, to be completely honest. To give my last couple opinions of what I think about all this, I'm going to start by saying I think the NIL dimension being added to college sports has been a net positive to society. I know a lot of people are against it because of competitive imbalance, and they get mad when a kid chooses a school because of money, but this is how I view it. This money is coming from rich donors that have the money to spend. It's kind of coming from rich advertisers that see this as a prudent investment, and it's finding its way into the bank accounts of college athletes that don't have a lot of money. A lot of these kids come from rough backgrounds, and then even if they don't, they're just college kids, who don't have a lot of money. So argument I hear a lot is, oh, these kids are trading off their NFL futures for just a little money now. If they get drafted in the first round, they'll make a lot more money. That's true for maybe like 1% of the kids that actually do hear their name drafted in the first round or hear their name drafted at all. So for a good deal amount of these kids, they're guys that they don't realize it yet. They just don't have NFL futures. And, that's not to say they're not good football players in high school, but it's just pure statistics that a good amount of these kids don't actually find themselves in the NFL in 4 or 5 years. So in years past, those kids were just straight up fucked. They got taken advantage of by coaches and by programs that these kids were banking on NFL futures, and they just didn't work out. And they looked at themselves 4 years, and they're like, wow, I'm not good enough to go in the NFL. I spent 4 years, working my ass off on the football field. I didn't see a red cent out of it. And now I got to go try to make myself a life. I didn't get any money. All these advertisers, my coach, my academic institution as a whole just made millions off of my back, and I didn't see a cent out of it. I think the fact that they make any money now at the beginning of their career means a lot. So if you're going to tell me that the trade-off of competitive imbalance isn't worth paying these athletes anything, I think that's not a great argument, and I'm just going to disagree on moral levels and then economic levels, I guess. I think it's better off for society if we have the money that wants to go where it does, if it does go. Now, I do think that competitive balance is important because the nature of sports as a whole, we watch these games because there's no predetermined outcomes. We spend money on sports because we like the fact that these teams are pretty close competitively. It is something that is going to have to be protected, and it's going to be tough to do that while still allowing these kids to maximize their earning potential. So I think a little trade-off of earning potential for these kids is worth it in the grand scheme of things to protect the integrity of the game, because this is the thing. People are going to start spending less money on college sports if it's not interesting. If we let one team just buy the best team every year, people are going to stop watching money, and these kids won't get anything because college sports won't be as attractive to first viewers and then advertisers. So to me, ultimately, the solution has to balance first athletes' earning potential, and then second, competitive balance. And, you know, that's not saying anything new. It's just such a tough situation to find yourself in as a rule maker. Really, like, there's no authority. You know, we have college presidents stepping up, college coaches stepping up. We have the friggin' president of the United States stepping up. There's really, I don't really know who to look for, to be completely honest, for a solution. So I think that we're going to see a lot of court cases over the next 2 years plus, and then we'll have a bit more legal authority as a case law starts to build up. And then going forward, you know, I guess we'll see. My final thoughts are, it's such a bad situation, but it's worth the trade-off just based on the fact that these kids are getting more money, or money at all now. You know, I kind of went into a spiel before, you know, a couple minutes ago about it, but to me, that's worth it to try to solve these problems. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all works out, but you know, the past 4 years have been a whirlwind. I'm just hoping some authority rises and we have a better understanding of the landscape going forward. But right now, it's the Wild West. You know, it was the Wild West. It continues to be the Wild West. Hopefully, we find ourselves in the Industrial Revolution at some point, but right now it seems like that's going to be down the road. You guys let me know what you think. You know, I know this is a bit more of an opinionated type video than I usually do, but I'm very interested to hear other, you know, problems that come up with this, any potential solutions. The thing with, like, if I came on here and told you solutions, every solution comes with 2 or 3 more problems that we would then have to go ahead and solve. So it's a very loaded situation, and, you know, there's no, I wish to say that there was no easy answer. I'm not sure there's an answer at all, but I'm very interested to see what you guys think, and thanks for watching.